My parents' favorite sold Grandma's house while I was still folding her laundry in the back room. They called me the thief. But Grandma's hidden letter had already decided who actually won. The morning it all came out, I wasn't in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. I was standing barefoot in her kitchen, with steam from the old kettle fogging the corner of the window, when the moving truck pulled up outside. The engine's low growl cut through the house before the knock did. It rolled up the street slow like it had all the time in the world, then shuddered to a stop right in front of Grandma's porch. Two men in orange vests climbed down, one stretching his shoulders, the other already flipping open a clipboard. Inside, the washing machine was still humming. I had a plastic laundry basket pressed against my hip, Ruth's nightgowns warm and damp against my arm. The TV in the front room mumbled a morning talk show so softly you could barely hear it. She never turned it up loud. Said she didn't like voices shouting at her. The knock came again. 3 firm taps, not tentative, not apologetic. I shifted the basket to my other hand and opened the door. "Morning," the taller mover said. He had a wind-burned face and tired kindness in his eyes, like he'd had too many of these conversations. "We have a move-out order for this address. Transfer of possession was finalized yesterday at 4 p.m. He turned the clipboard toward me. There it was. The address. The parcel number. And at the bottom, in blue ink that had bled just enough into the paper fibers, the name. Ruth Elaine North. Her signature. Or something pretending to be it. The laundry basket suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I tightened my arm beneath it. "There must be a mistake," I said. The words came out flat. Not sharp. Not high-pitched. Just level. "She hasn't moved anywhere." The mover glanced back at the truck, then down to the form. "Ma'am, I'm just going by what we got from the client and the title company. New owner takes possession today. We're supposed to start staging by noon." "New owner," I repeated. The diesel fumes drifted in around us, that raw oily smell that clings to clothes. "Who gave you the order?" He tapped a line near the bottom. "Power of attorney on file. Acting agent Trent North." My brother's name. I stared at it for a heartbeat too long. Long enough that the paper blurred and came back into focus. Behind me from the front room, the talk show host laughed at something I couldn't hear. "Right," I said. "Of course." He hesitated. "If there's an issue, I can give you my supervisor's number. But we are on a schedule, ma'am." My fingers left a faint damp mark when I took the clipboard. The laundry basket dug harder into my side. "Give me 24 hours, I said. "Just one day to clarify things with the family. Don't move anything out yet." He exhaled through his nose, glanced back at his coworker, then scribbled something on his own copy. "I'll note a delay request," he said. "Can't promise more than that without the office clearing it. Here." He pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. "Call this number. Ask for Denise." I slid the card between my fingers and nodded. "Thank you," I said. When I closed the door, the house felt smaller. The air heavier. As if the walls had leaned in to listen. The TV in the front room still muttered. The kettle whistled half-heartedly and then settled. My feet knew the way down the short hall without me thinking about it. I'd walked this route 50 times a day. Laundry basket. Hallway. Front room. Yellow chair. Ruth was exactly where I'd left her. In that faded yellow armchair by the front window. The one with the armrest worn thin where her right elbow always rested. Her hands were folded, small and pale in her lap, and her eyes were on the television, though I could tell she wasn't really seeing it. "Grandma," I said. She looked over slow. Her vision had been fine at her last appointment, but she'd taken to moving her eyes carefully, like every turn had to be earned. "There's a moving truck outside," I said. "With our address on the paperwork." Flicker. That's all it was. Not shock. Not confusion. Just something tiny that passed behind her eyes and vanished. "Ah," she said. "Ah." I echoed. She turned her gaze back to the TV for a moment, like it might offer a better script than the one she had. "Marcella said this is what needed to happen," she murmured. "She said it was time." My mother's name sat between us like another piece of furniture. "She said what exactly?" I asked. Ruth's fingers tightened once, then relaxed. "She said the bills were too much," she said. "Said the house was more work than I could manage. Said I'd be safer in a place where there's always someone on duty. She smiled then, but it wasn't the kind that reached anything. She brought me brochures, she added. Harmony Gardens. They had pictures of trees and people playing cards. It looked fine. So she decided to sell the house, I said. She said it was for the bills, Ruth repeated, as if that phrase had been rehearsed. Just some papers to help her take care of things. That's what she told me. The laundry basket was still tucked against my side. I set it down on the floor, one nightgown strap slipping over the edge. Did you sign everything they put in front of you? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the corner of the moving truck was just barely visible, orange vest reflecting in the glass. Not everything, she said at last. I waited for more. It didn't come. What didn't you sign? I asked, keeping my voice soft. There was a time years ago when I would have pushed harder. That time had taught me that pushing Marcella from inside this house only ever got you labeled ungrateful. With Ruth, it just sank the conversation into silence. Ruth swallowed, her throat working against skin that had thinned to almost translucent. I told her I needed to think about some of it, she said. But she said there wasn't time, so she had Trent bring different forms. He said it was all the same thing. Just for the bills. A faint, bitter line shaped itself at the corner of her mouth. Your mother always liked to put the big pieces in his hands. That part wasn't new. I'd heard a version of that since I was 10. Images flickered across my mind like old film frames, out of order but familiar. I'm 15, clearing plates in this same kitchen while Marcella clinks her wine glass in the dining room, saying, "To Trent, our future. Our boy is going to own half this city someday." I'm 19, standing in the doorway with a duffel bag while she looks me up and down and says, "You're good at caring, Celia. It suits you. Not everybody needs a degree to be useful." I'm 28, signing a short-term contract with the home care agency after the call comes that Ruth fell in the shower. The pay is barely enough to cover gas and groceries, but Marcella calls it perfect for me. Flexible enough to keep me available, she says. Trent, meanwhile, is my parents' favorite. Fully and openly. The phrase never leaves their lips, but it hangs on every introduction. This is my son Trent, he's in real estate development. The pride sits differently in her voice when she says his name. The present snapped back into focus with the distant hiss of someone dragging a dolly up the truck ramp outside. I crouched to pick a nightgown back into the basket. When did you sign? I asked. Do you remember the day? The day they brought the cake, she said. I looked up. What cake? The lemon one, Ruth said. From that bakery on Hollister. Trent brought it and said it was a treat. We sat here. She tapped the arm of her chair. He poured me tea. He set the papers on the table. He put the pen in my hand. The scene built itself in my mind uninvited. Trent's easy charm, the way he leaned on chairs like they were props. Marcella hovering with that thin smile she wore for people who needed convincing. Did they tell you they were selling the house? I asked. They said we were freeing up equity, she said. The phrase sounded foreign in her mouth. Making sure I could afford the good place instead of some state thing. She took a breath. I've seen those places on the news, you know, with the stories about people being left in hallways. She knew that scared me. Fear is a kind of pen too. I straightened, the laundry basket creaking. Outside, the movers were still waiting. One of them had leaned against the truck, scrolling his phone. The other was talking to the neighbor from across the street, the one who'd watched me shovel this sidewalk every winter since I was old enough. I'm going to call Mom, I said. Ruth nodded once like there was nothing else to do. I stepped into the kitchen and reached for the phone on the wall, the old landline with the curly cord that had survived 3 different trends in communication. My own cell was in my back pocket, but dialing on the landline felt more accurate. Marcella picked up on the 3rd ring. Hello. Hey, I said. It's me. I figured, she said. What's wrong? I'm about to head into a meeting. There's a moving truck in front of Grandma's house, I said. With a move-out order. They said transfer of possession happened yesterday. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. I told Trent to give you a heads up, she said. Honestly, Celia, I can't manage every detail for you. A heads up. I repeated. He sold her house. He didn't sell anything he wasn't authorized to sell, she snapped. You know how much she's been struggling. The stairs, the shoveling, the maintenance. I've been doing the shoveling, I said. I've been doing the maintenance. I live here, remember? Exactly, she said. And you've been drowning doing it. This is what I mean when I say you don't see the bigger picture. Harmony Gardens is a good facility. They have on-site nurses, recreation, people her age. The house is just bricks and pipes, Celia. Just bricks, I said. And do you have any idea what the property taxes are now? She continued, warming into her argument. The heating in winter? We've been carrying that, in case you've forgotten. Trent has sacrificed so much to take care of this for us. You should be grateful someone in this family knows how to move when things need moving. There it was. The script. Trent as savior. Me as ungrateful. Wait. You sold her home while I was folding her laundry in the next room, I said quietly. You didn't think maybe I should be in that conversation? You get emotional, she said. This was a decision that needed to be made without a scene. Grandma agreed. She signed, Celia. She's not a child. Don't make her one. She said she signed for the bills, I said. Yes, Marcella said. The ones you apparently don't see because you think your time is the only thing being spent. A dull ache had started behind my eyes, the kind that comes from clenching your jaw. This wasn't an emergency move, I said. You've been planning it. Of course we've been planning, she said. That's what responsible people do. Look, if you're so confused, why don't you come into the city this weekend? We'll sit down with Trent, lay out the numbers and clear the air. Maybe then you'll see we're not the villains you've decided we are. My fingers curled around the phone cord. So you want a family meeting, I said. Without Grandma. For her own peace, she said. She doesn't need the stress. We'll handle the logistics. It's what we're good at. We. Not you. Never you. I'll be there, I said. Good, she replied. And Celia? Try not to bring that tone. It doesn't help. When I hung up, the house was so quiet I could hear the fridge humming. This channel exists for the people who did everything right and still got left out of the room where the decisions were made. The narrator inside me wanted to say, even then, if that's ever been you, you're in the right place. I went back to the front room. Ruth's eyes slid from the TV back to me. Well, she asked. We're having a family discussion, I said. At Trent's place. Her mouth pressed into a line. Will I be there? She asked. No, I said. Apparently that would be too much stress. She gave a soft, humorless huff. Your mother always did like to tidy up the story before the person living it had a chance to speak, she said. I sat on the arm of the couch across from her, the laundry basket between us like a small plastic wall. Did you want to move? I asked. To Harmony Gardens? She tilted her head, considering. I wanted to not be a burden, she said. That's not the same thing. We sat with that. Outside, the movers' footsteps moved back and forth on the sidewalk, the scrape of their boots against concrete like a metronome ticking down. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course, she said. Did you ever talk to anyone else? I said slowly. About what you wanted? A lawyer? Pastor? Anyone who wasn't Mom or Trent? Her eyes flicked to the small stack of books on the side table. A worn Bible. A crossword puzzle book. A hymnal with the gold letters on the spine almost completely rubbed off. I talked to someone, she said. Who? I asked. She looked back at me and for a heartbeat the fog of age cleared. I saw the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes, to balance a checkbook, to bake bread without a recipe. I'll tell you when you come back from that meeting, she said. If they haven't already told on themselves by then. Later that week, Trent texted me the address to his apartment downtown. A gleaming tower, all glass and steel, the kind of place he'd always said he deserved. 3 p.m. Saturday, he wrote. We'll walk through everything. No surprises. Let's keep it civil. On Saturday, I left Ruth settled in her yellow chair with a blanket over her knees and a thermos of tea within reach. The TV remote was in her hand. I kissed the top of her head and stepped outside into air that smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. The drive into the city took 40 minutes. Long enough for my brain to replay every conversation with Marcella in recent months, the way she'd shifted certain topics away from me, how often she'd said, we'll take care of it, when I asked about bills or paperwork. Trent's building had a polished lobby that made you instinctively lower your voice. A receptionist smiled without teeth and pointed me toward the elevators. When the doors opened onto his floor, I could hear laughter down the hall. Not the carefree kind, the brittle kind families use when they're rehearsing a story they want to believe. I stepped into his apartment. The first thing I noticed wasn't the view, or the kitchen island, or the framed abstract art on the walls. It was the folder on the coffee table. Thick, manila, already open, with edges of paper fanned out like it had been rifled through more than once. They said it was just to clarify things. They didn't know I was about to let them talk themselves into a confession they'd never escape. Trent's apartment smelled like expensive candles and takeout that had gone cold. He met me at the door with a hug that never quite landed, all cologne and pressed shirt, his hand patting my shoulder like I was a guest instead of the person who'd been living with the fallout of his decisions. "Hey Sel," he said. "You made it." Behind him, the living room was already staged. Marcella on the end of the couch, ankles crossed, a glass of water on a coaster beside her. Aunt Denise and Uncle Paul in matching polite expressions, perched in armchairs like they'd been told this was a show they couldn't miss. And on the coffee table, the folder, slightly open, a neon highlighter resting on top. Ruth's absence sat in the room like a missing piece of furniture. Every surface was too smooth without her there to scuff it. "Sit," Marcella said, gesturing to the armchair opposite her. "Let's just talk this through like adults." I sat. The city skyline glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind them, all glass teeth and sharp angles. Trent lifted the folder, squared its edges against his knee, and opened it with a little flourish. "Okay," he said. "Let's get some clarity." He spread out the papers like a magician laying down cards. Bank statements. All of them copies from the last 18 months, the kind printed on thin paper with the bank's logo faintly repeating in the background. Several lines were highlighted in neon yellow. Small withdrawals. Grocery store sized. Pharmacy sized. Hardware store sized. Trent tapped a finger on the first page. "These," he said, "are Grandma's accounts." He said grandma in that stage voice he used, the one he rolled out at holidays when he wanted to sound like he was still part of our everyday life. Marcella folded her hands in her lap, the picture of reluctant concern. "We've been doing a review," Trent continued, "because we needed to understand why the balances have been dropping faster than expected. And what we found." He shook his head with a little incredulous smile. "Well, these patterns are concerning." "Concerning," Marcella echoed like they'd practiced. He slid one statement closer to me, the yellow lines glowing under the living room light. "Regular cash withdrawals," he said. "From the same ATM. Sometimes twice a week. No record of what they're being used for." I looked at the paper. The dates lined up with real things in my mind without even trying. $50 when the dishwasher broke, and I had to call a repairman who only took cash. $40 for the copay on her new medication. $60 when we needed a space heater because the back bedroom never got warm in January. Trent leaned back. "From where we sit," he said, "it looks like someone has been helping themselves. Quietly. Over time." Aunt Denise shifted in her seat. Uncle Paul cleared his throat but didn't say anything. Marcella's eyes were on me now, carefully neutral. "We couldn't just sit by while you drained her accounts, Celia," she said, and there it was, the line she'd chosen. Selling the house was the only way to protect her. The only way. The words hung there. Heavy. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to flail so they could point and say, "See? She's hysterical. She can't be trusted with decisions." My first instinct rose fast. To tell them about every receipt, every late-night run to the pharmacy, every plumber who rang the bell because a pipe had decided to burst at 11 p.m. To throw the documents back at them and point out that while they were sipping wine at rooftop bars, I was scrubbing the kitchen floor after Ruth lost her balance and dropped a pot of soup. Instead, I picked up the nearest statement. The paper crackled slightly as I lifted it. The highlighter's drag marks were crooked in places. Trent had rushed through this part. I followed the lines, date to amount to quiet little memories. You could practically hear the clock ticking in the quiet. "You're not even going to look at me?" Marcella said. "You're just going to sit there?" I turned a second page. Another series of yellow lines. Another sequence of ordinary survival. Ruth's voice from the kitchen came back to me. Not everything. I set the pages down, stacked them neatly, and finally looked up. If that's what you believe, I said, there's nothing I can say you'd hear. Trent blinked. That's it, he said. You're not going to deny it? I stood. The carpet under my shoes was thick, the kind that swallowed sound. I smoothed my palms against my jeans and let my fingers brush the edges of the folder one last time. I don't have to perform for you, I said. Not anymore. Marcella's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Celia, she said, warning threaded through the syllables. Don't walk out of this conversation. We're trying to help you understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You sold Grandma's house, and you needed a villain to justify it. I'm convenient. The part of me that used to beg for their approval stirred, then quieted. I'm not going to shout, I added. I'm not going to give you the scene you're braced for. I stepped around the coffee table, the folder still lying there, the yellow highlights like bruises. Aunt Denise's eyes followed me. Uncle Paul stared at his hands. At the door I paused. Tell her, I said without turning back, that if she wants to know what actually happened, I'll be at the clerk's office. I left. No slammed doors. No raised voice. Just the soft click of Trent's door closing behind me, and the echo of their story collapsing in on itself in that polished living room. This was the hardest restraint I'd ever shown in that family. Every step down the hallway felt like walking away from years of instinct to explain, defend, justify. By the time the elevator doors closed, my hands were shaking. If someone in your family has ever twisted the story to make you the villain, you already know that feeling. That mix of rage and exhaustion and absurdity. Before we go further, if that's ever happened to you, tell me in the comments. No names. Just what they accused you of. I promise, you're not the only one. The city blurred past as I drove. Traffic lights, pedestrians, a bus hissing at a stop. My phone buzzed twice on the passenger seat, Marcella, then Trent, but I didn't pick up. Instead, I followed the signs for the county complex. The clerk's building sat squat and practical between taller structures. A brick rectangle with metal-framed windows and a flag that snapped in the wind. Inside, the air smelled like paper, toner, and old coffee. It was late afternoon. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A wall clock ticked above the row of service windows, the minute hand edging toward 4. I took a number from the machine by the door, a 27, and sat on a vinyl bench. My legs bounced, energy with nowhere to go. When the speaker crackled and a bored voice called, "E27 window 4, I stood too fast and had to steady myself. Window 4 was manned by a man in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair, rolled up sleeves, tie slightly loosened. His name tag read Wilder in small black letters. He glanced up, took in my expression, the folder in my hands, and something in his face softened. "How can I help you?" he asked. I slid the folder under the glass. The edges caught slightly on the metal lip. "These are documents for a property," I said. "A sale. I need to understand if what they did is allowed." He opened the folder, spreading the pages with the practiced care of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "You got these from the moving company?" he asked, eyes scanning. "Yes," I said. "They showed up with a move-out order this morning. Said transfer of possession happened yesterday. Said my brother signed as power of attorney for my grandmother." He flipped to the page with the power of attorney, then to the deed transfer. "Do you see this?" he asked, tapping the date on the POA. The numbers lined up in neat little rows. The POA had been executed just over 3 weeks before the sale. "And this," he added, moving his finger down to the buyer information. The buyer's name wasn't a person. It was 3 words. Westfield Asset Holdings, LLC. "Is that normal?" I asked. He tilted his head. "It's not unusual for an LLC to purchase property," he said. "What's interesting is that this LLC," he slid his chair back, typed something quickly into his computer, then nodded, "was registered 19 days before this sale closed." He looked back at me. "Who signed as contact?" he asked. He flipped the page around so I could see. Under contact address, my mother's street appeared. Not Ruth's. Not Trent's. Marcella's. My breath hitched. "That's my mother," I said. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter. Okay, he said slowly. Here's what I'm seeing. A very recent power of attorney, executed right before a discounted sale, to a brand new LLC tied to your mother's address. And your grandmother is? Ruth North, I said. She's at a care facility now. Harmony Gardens. Did she know the house was being sold? He asked. Not like this, I said. He watched me for a moment. Look, he said, lowering his voice just a touch, like he was stepping slightly out of the script they're given. I can't give legal advice, but I can tell you that when we see patterns like this, sometimes the state attorney general's office gets interested. Especially if there's any hint of elder financial exploitation. Exploitation, I repeated. The word felt heavy in my mouth. He slid the documents back to me. Come back Monday, he said. Bring anything you have with your grandmother's actual signature. Letters. Old forms. Anything that shows her handwriting over time. Bring a copy of the POA, the sale contract, and those. He gestured to the folder. We'll see if there's something here the state needs to know, he said. Why Monday? I asked. Because it gives you time to gather, he said simply. And because some offices close early on Fridays, and I don't want your complaint sitting in the wrong inbox all weekend. He offered a small, tired smile. What's your name? I asked. Oren, he said. Oren Wilder. Thank you, Oren, I said. On the drive home, the sun slid lower, turning the tops of trees gold. My brain inventoried what I had. The cards Ruth had mailed me over the years, the notes she'd left on the fridge, the church sign-up sheet she'd filled out by hand when she still drove herself on Sundays. That night, I spread them across my kitchen table. The table was smaller than Ruth's, secondhand from a neighbor when I first moved out. It groaned under the weight of the paper history of our lives. A birthday card from when I turned 12. To my Celia, who always notices the things other people walk past. Her cursive curved gently, letters leaning slightly to the right, like they were tired but still standing. A sticky note she'd left on the fridge years ago. Soup on the stove back by 6. The S was always a little larger than it needed to be, tail curling. A church bake sale list, her name signed at the bottom. Ruthie North in full. I traced the lines with my finger. Her hand had changed over time. Tiny tremors had crept in. Some days the pressure was lighter. Some days heavier. But there were constants. The way her R dipped just a little too low. The way her N never quite closed. I took the POA copy from the folder and laid it beside her letters. Her full signature on the POA looked rushed. The loops tighter. The baseline less steady. Maybe it was just age. Maybe it was the influence of someone standing too close with a pen. But on one of the addendum pages, where initials were supposed to appear, something else stood out. The initials were small. Upright. Perfectly aligned. They lacked the rightward drift that showed up in every other sample. It was a subtle difference, but once you saw it, it refused to disappear. My stomach knotted. I thought of Trent at the table with the lemon cake. Of Marcella's hand resting lightly on Ruth's shoulder. Of a pen nudged into position. I slept little that night. When I did drift off, I dreamt of papers covering the floor. Of Ruth's signature walking away from me as I reached for it. The next afternoon, I drove out to Harmony Gardens. The facility sat on a hill, with a small garden wrapping around its base. Someone had planted marigolds near the entrance, their orange heads bobbing in the breeze. Inside, the lighting was softer than I'd expected. The reception area smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something like cinnamon. Ruth's room was on the second floor. The nurse at the desk gave me a nod when I knocked on the doorframe and stepped inside. Her room was small but tidy. A single bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. A potted plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves glossy. Someone had pinned a couple of family photos to a corkboard. Me and Ruth at the county fair, Trent and Marcella at some holiday years ago. Ruth was sitting on the bed, cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. Her hymnal rested on the bedside table, its spine cracked from decades of use. You look tired, she said as I came in. Mirror meet reflection, I replied, managing a small smile. I sat in the chair by the window. Outside, a couple of residents shuffled along the garden path, a staff member between them. Did they explain things? I asked. If by things you mean why I'm here and my house is full of strangers' footprints, then yes, she said dryly. Your mother came in on a storm cloud, told me it was all taken care of, and that I was lucky to have children who stepped up. She mimed quotation marks in the air. My mother always liked to fix things her own way, I said. She doesn't fix, Ruth said. She arranges. There's a difference. We sat in a small pocket of shared quiet. I should have told you more, Ruth said finally. Earlier. Before it got this far. I kept thinking I'd have time. Her gaze slid to the hymnal on the table. My eyes followed. Her fingers, thin and spotted, reached out to rest on its cover. She stroked the worn leather absent-mindedly. If anything ever happens to, she began then stopped. The sentence broke and fell at our feet. To what? I asked gently. She shook her head once, as if clearing a thought she didn't want to give words to yet. You'll find what you need when you need it, she said instead. You always have. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one she could give. On Monday I was back at the clerk's building. The fluorescent lights were just as unforgiving. The clock hands had barely moved when my number was called. Oren greeted me with the same steady expression. You brought them? He asked. I set the stack of letters, notes, and forms on the counter, along with the POA copy and the sale contract. He arranged them in neat rows, the way any good clerk would. But his eyes had the alertness of someone who knew the story wasn't just ink and paper. Okay, he said softly. Let's look. He placed one of Ruth's old letters beside the POA. You see this? He asked, tracing her signature with a pen cap, not touching the ink. Same loops. Same lean. Even with the tremor, the rhythm's familiar. He then tapped the initials on the addendum page. And this, he said. Straighter. Tighter. Looks like someone copying her rather than her actually signing. Not definitive proof but suspicious. He flipped to the sale contract. Sale price is. He read the number out loud. It was lower than what similar houses on Sycamore Street had been going for in recent months. And you said the sale closed 19 days after the LLC was registered. Yes, I said. He nodded. On its own, each of these things could be nothing, he said. Taken together, they start to look like a pattern. And in my world, patterns like this often fall under phrases like elder financial exploitation and fraudulent conveyance. He emphasized the words, but he didn't let them float unanchored. What does that actually mean? I asked. In plain language. It means, he said, that the law doesn't like it when people use power of attorney to override an elder's previously expressed wishes for their assets, especially if those wishes were made when they were clearly competent. And it really doesn't like it when a brand new company, tied to those same family members, scoops up the property at a discount. He leaned back. The state attorney general's office, he continued, has a unit that looks into this sort of thing. So does the real estate board. If you file a complaint, attach these documents and lay out the timeline, they might decide this isn't just family drama. I thought of Ruth's voice saying not everything. I thought of Marcella's script about protecting her. I thought of Trent's careful highlights on those statements. The most prepared person in any room is usually the one nobody saw coming, the narrator in me said. Celia walked into that office with a stack of birthday cards and grocery lists, and walked out with enough proof to make the state listen. That night, back in my apartment, I started sorting through the boxes of Ruth's belongings I'd been storing since the move. They were stacked against one wall, labeled in my handwriting. Kitchen, linens, photos, church/papers. I dragged the church/papers box to the middle of the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor. Inside were programs from services, bulletins with announcements about potlucks and choir concerts, old offering envelopes, a few printed newsletters. And near the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel the way Ruth always wrapped things she didn't want scratched, was her hymnal. The cover was cracked along the spine, the once gold lettering faded to a dull ghost of itself. I ran my thumb over it, feeling the ridges. When I opened it, a familiar smell rose, paper, ink, and a faint trace of perfume from decades past. The pages had underlines in light pencil, notes in the margins from different sermons. Trust, in the corner of one. Listen, in another. At the very back, where the cover met the last page, something thicker than paper pressed against my fingers. I tilted the book, and a folded sheet of lined notebook paper slid out, landing softly in my lap. My heart kicked. The paper was creased, the folds worn from being opened and closed more than once. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Ruth's. Full. Deliberate. Not the rushed scrawl of someone cornered at a kitchen table, but the measured line of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted to say. At the top, a date. 6 weeks before the power of attorney. I read. She wrote about a trip to an office on Hadley Street. About a man named Arthur Lemon, kind eyes, bad coffee, who helped her draft something formal, because she no longer trusted conversations that weren't on paper. She mentioned Marcella's tendencies and Trent's big plans, in the gentle but unflinching language of someone who'd seen enough. To the one who stayed when staying was hard, she wrote, I leave everything I have left, including the right to my name. My name followed. Celia North. In her handwriting. On my floor. Beneath the letter was another document, folded separately. Heavier paper. Official watermark. The codicil. Arthur Lemon's signature and stamp were at the bottom, along with that of a notary. In neat type, it spelled out what Ruth had wanted for her estate. The house. The small savings accounts. The contents of the safe deposit box I hadn't even known existed. She had written the verdict long before Marcella and Trent staged theirs. I sat there for a long time, the hymnal open on one knee, the letter in my hand, the codicil on the floor in front of me. The sounds of my building hummed around me. Someone's TV on low. Pipes creaking. A dog 2 floors down barking at something invisible. Ruth had not been a passive victim of her own life. She had seen what was coming and quietly, carefully moved first. By the time they called me a thief, Grandma had already written the verdict. The next morning I walked back into the clerk's office with the hymnal, the codicil, and a knot in my stomach that hadn't loosened in days. Orrin was at the same window, sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee gone lukewarm beside his keyboard. When he saw the stack in my hands, he straightened. You found something, he said. I slid the documents under the glass. The codicil on top. The letter behind it. Copies of the POA and sale contract clipped together. She found something, I said. Months before any of this. He picked up the codicil first, eyes scanning the heading, the date, the signature lines. Arthur Lemon, he read. Good reputation. Old school. If he drafted this, he did it by the book. He flipped to the last page, where Ruth's full signature sat beside the notary's stamp. 6 weeks before the POA, he murmured. Same hand. Same tremor. No one hovering with cake. He set it down carefully. All right, he said. If you're ready, we take this to the next level. What does that look like? I asked. He pulled a form from a drawer and slid it toward me. Formal complaint to the State Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit, he said. You'll name your mother and your brother. You'll attach all of this. Codicil, POA, sale documents, the timeline, when she moved, when they sold, when they filed the LLC. You're not just telling a story anymore. You're presenting evidence. The words name your mother and your brother sat heavy. I thought of Marcella's laugh at the dining table, the way she'd pulled me onto her lap when I was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. I thought of Trent teaching me to ride a bike in the alley, hands steady on the seat until he let go. Now I was the one letting go. What happens if I do this? I asked. An investigator reviews it, he said. If they see what I see, they open a case. They can issue notices, request more documents, talk to the buyer, the title company. They can recommend that the court voids the sale if they determine it was a fraudulent conveyance. And they can refer any more serious behavior to prosecutors if it rises to that. Is this normal? I asked. Calling the state on your own family? He held my gaze. What they did stopped being family business when they used legal tools to strip your grandmother of what she'd already decided, he said. You're not attacking them. You're defending her. And yourself. Picked up the pen. The complaint form wasn't dramatic. Black ink on white paper. Boxes to tick. Lines to fill. Names to spell correctly. I wrote. Marcella North. Trent North. Under nature of complaint, I wrote. Sale of primary residence via after codicil naming alternate executor and beneficiary. Possible elder financial exploitation. Orrin walked me through the rest, dates, addresses, copies listed as attachments. When I signed at the bottom, my hand shook once, then steadied. He made copies, stamped them, and slid my set back to me. "This isn't going to be quick," he said. "But it's movement. And movement is better than standing in their shadow." While the gears of the state started turning, my brain kept replaying conversations I'd tucked away and tried to forget. 3 months earlier, Marcella had come by the house to talk. She'd stood in the kitchen with her phone pressed between her shoulder and her ear, rummaging through the mail, her words half directed at me and half at whoever was on the other end. "I told him that deal was too risky," she'd said, voice low but sharp. "You can't leverage everything on one project, and then act surprised when it collapses. He's good, but he's not invincible." I'd been at the sink rinsing dishes. Water running, plates clinking. I wasn't supposed to hear, but of course I did. She'd caught my eye then and moved into the hallway, lowering her voice further. Now, sitting at my own kitchen table with a copy of the complaint in front of me, I saw it clearly: Trent's deal gone wrong. The hole in his finances that had needed filling. The house as a convenient plug. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Trent. "We should talk this through as family," the text read. "No need to drag outsiders into it. Call me." I set the phone down. He messaged again 5 minutes later. "This is going to blow up bigger than you think, Sel. Once it's in the system, you can't control it. Let's fix it quietly." He'd forgotten that silence was what got us here in the first place. I didn't respond. Later that evening, another message lit up the screen. This one from Aunt Denise. "I made an anonymous call to an elder abuse hotline weeks ago," she wrote. I couldn't ignore what Marcella and Trent were planning. I didn't know what they'd do, but I'm glad you're doing something now. I stared at the words. All this time Marcella had acted like I was the only one with a problem, like my concern was an overreaction. In reality, even the people sitting on her side of the living room had seen enough to reach for a phone in private. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. When the letter from the Attorney General's office arrived, it came in a plain envelope, the kind that could have been anything from a utility bill to a flyer. Inside was a formal notice. They had opened an investigation. They'd assigned a case number and an investigator. They requested additional documentation, title company records, any correspondence from Westfield Asset Holdings, LLC, and confirmation of Ruth's residence and care arrangement at Harmony Gardens. They also notified the title company and the buyer that the transaction was under review. Pending that review, the state recommended a temporary freeze on any transfer of proceeds from the sale. In simple terms, the money was not going anywhere fast. Somewhere in an office I'd never see, an email landed in a buyer's attorney's inbox, politely informing them that their client had purchased into a storm. It didn't take long for the phone calls to begin. The first was Marcella's. "What did you do?" she demanded. No greeting. No pretense. Her voice already frayed. "I filed a complaint," I said. "I followed the process they gave me." "You drag strangers into our business," she said. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" "They froze the funds, Celia. The buyer's lawyer called us. They're questioning the sale. This is humiliating." "You drag strangers in when you sold Grandma's house behind her back," I said calmly. "Those strangers just wore suits instead of uniforms." "This is different," she snapped. "This is the state. This is public. Do you understand what you've done to our family's reputation?" I thought of Ruth sitting in Harmony Gardens, her life folded into a room with a single window, because Marcella was more worried about appearances than her mother's voice. "I understand what you and Trent did to Grandma's life," I said. "You can decide which reputation matters more." She made a sound halfway between a scoff and a sob. "You always were dramatic," she said. "You twist everything so you can play the victim." I was only trying to make sure she didn't end up in some understaffed nightmare. I did what I had to do. "And now you did what made sense to you," I cut in. "The state is deciding whether it was legal. Those are not the same thing." Trent called next. "Do you realize," he said, voice clipped, "that my license is on the line?" I heard the clatter of a keyboard in the background, the echo of a larger, emptier space than the one we'd grown up in. "You used your license to sign away our grandmother's house," I said. "You can't be shocked that someone wants to look at that." "This wasn't a scam," he said. "I didn't trick anyone." She signed. "We followed procedure." "You're making this into a circus." You registered an LLC 19 days before buying a house at a discount from your own grandmother under a last-minute POA, I replied. If that doesn't look like a trick, maybe your industry has lower standards than I thought. Why are you doing this? He asked, genuine confusion leaking through. You've never cared about money. This isn't about money, I said. It's about respect. For what she already decided. For me. There was a silence on the line, thick and heavy. You're destroying the family over paperwork, he said finally. Paperwork is how you tried to erase me, I said. Paperwork is how I'm writing myself back in. Weeks later, I found myself in a conference room that felt both too small and too important for what it held. It wasn't a grand courtroom. No wood paneling, no rows of benches. Just a long table, 4 chairs on each side, and a projector screen that remained politely blank. On one side, me, Orrin, and a woman from the Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit named Ms. Harper. On the other, Marcella, Trent, and their attorney. The attorney had the practiced neutral face of someone who'd seen every kind of family sit in those chairs. A recorder on the table clicked on. Ms. Harper began by stating the case number, the date, the participants. Then she started laying out the documents the way Orrin had in the clerk's office. The codicil first. Executed on February 14th, she said. Drafted by attorney Arthur Lemon. Witnessed and notarized. Naming Celia North as executor and primary beneficiary. She placed it on the table where everyone could see. Then the POA. Executed 6 weeks later, she said. Naming Trent North as agent, with authority over financial and real estate matters. She laid that down beside the codicil. Then the sale contract. Property at Sycamore Street, she said. Sold to Westfield Asset Holdings, LLC, for a price significantly below assessed value. Closing 19 days after the LLC's registration. She added copies of Ruth's letters, the handwriting samples. Finally, she looked up. This, she said, her voice even, looks on its face like you attempted to override your mother's earlier, competent decisions with a later instrument obtained under pressure. Marcella's lawyer shifted. My client, he began, was acting out of concern for her mother's welfare. The house was a burden. The facility is. We are not here to debate the quality of the facility, Ms. Harper said, not unkindly. We're here to determine whether the legal mechanisms used to fund that decision respected your mother's prior expressed wishes, and whether the financial benefit to you and your son compromised that. Marcella leaned forward, tears brightening her eyes. I was only trying to help, she said. She's so fragile. She gets confused. Celia twists everything to make me out as some villain. I've been the one dealing with the taxes, the repairs, the late notices. You cannot imagine the stress I've been under. I made the decisions I thought were best. I never. Ms. Harper held up a hand. No one is saying you wanted to harm your mother, she said. What we're saying is that intent and impact can be very different. Your mother went on her own to an attorney and chose Celia to handle her estate. You later came back with a POA that gave your son the power to undo that choice. That is a problem. Trent shifted in his chair, jaw tight. She signed, he said. I didn't force her. She knew what she was doing. Ms. Harper slid the handwriting analysis across the table. The notary's log doesn't show any capacity concerns noted, she said. But the timing, the financial outcome, and the involvement of your newly formed LLC make it impossible for us to ignore the possibility of undue influence. The investigator just laid out everything on the table, the narrator in me said. Before you hear what happens next, what would your verdict be? Guilty or justified? Drop it in the comments and tell me exactly who you mean. While we sat in that conference room, another conversation was happening up the hill at Harmony Gardens. A staff member rolled in a small camera and placed it on the table in front of Ruth. A notary and a social worker sat to one side, observing. Mrs. North, the social worker said, we're just going to ask you a few questions on video, all right? You can take your time. There are no wrong answers. Ruth adjusted her cardigan and lifted her chin. Do you remember visiting an attorney named Arthur Lemon earlier this year? The social worker asked. Yes, Ruth said. I went by myself. I drove. Parked in front of his office, paid the meter, walked up the steps. Didn't even need the rail. Why did you go see him? The social worker asked. Because I wanted my say on paper, Ruth replied. My daughter has always been good at talking around things. I didn't want my wishes to be another thing she rearranged to suit herself. And what did you ask Mr. Lemon to do? The social worker asked. I asked him to write something official saying that when I was gone, I wanted Celia to decide what happened to my things, Ruth said. Not Marcella. Not Trent. Celia. Because she was the one in the house with me when it mattered. Her eyes flicked to the camera. I knew what I was doing, she added. Nobody sat me down at the kitchen table with cake and said, sign this for the bills. I made that choice on my own 2 feet. Her statement wasn't dramatic. It was clear. Steady. Enough. Back in the conference room, Ms. Harper closed her folder. Given the evidence, she said, our office is recommending that the court void the sale of the Sycamore Street property as a fraudulent conveyance, restore it to Ruth North's estate under the February codicil, and refer the matter to the Real Estate Commission for review of Mr. North's conduct as a licensee. Marcella's lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew which way the wind was blowing. You can appeal, Ms. Harper said. You can contest. But understand that any further resistance will be weighed against the clarity of your mother's prior decisions and this pattern of behavior. Marcella's shoulders sagged. So she gets everything, she said, jerking her chin toward me. Celia wins and we get what? A slapped wrist. This isn't about who wins, Ms. Harper said. It's about whose voice the law recognizes. In this case, that voice is your mother's. And she chose Celia. Weeks later, the court's order came. Again in a plain envelope. Again in black ink on white paper. The sale of the house at Sycamore Street was voided. Title was restored to the estate of Ruth Elaine North, to be administered under the February codicil naming Celia North as executor and primary beneficiary. The order noted that the court had found the PO insufficient to override prior competent estate planning, and cited risk of undue influence in self-dealing in the transaction. Attached was a separate notice from the Real Estate Commission. They were opening their own inquiry into Trent's role. His license was flagged for review. He would be expected to respond. There was also a letter from the buyer's attorney. It was less polite. It stated that their client had entered into the transaction in good faith reliance on the presented documents, and would be seeking restitution from the sellers for costs incurred, including legal fees, inspections, and lost opportunities. I read it once, then set it aside. Standing on the courthouse steps, the order in my hands, the city noise blurred around me. People moved past, talking into phones, balancing coffee cups, living lives completely unrelated to the weight I was holding. I didn't cheer. There was no fist raised in victory, no movie soundtrack swell. I just exhaled. The breath I'd been holding since the moving truck pulled up on Sycamore Street finally left my body. Relief washed through me, cool and sharp. Right behind it came grief, for the grandmother who had to write her own protection into a hymnal, for the girl inside me who had spent decades trying to prove she wasn't the family's mistake. They thought the house was just equity. Grandma knew it was evidence. The first time we drove back to Sycamore Street after the order, the house looked smaller. Not because it had changed, but because everything else had felt so big for so long: courtrooms, conference rooms, letters with seals, that this simple little single-story place seemed almost shy in comparison. I parked at the curb, engine ticking as it cooled. Ruth sat in the passenger seat, hands folded over the handle of her walker, eyes fixed on the front steps. You sure you're up for this? I asked. She nodded once. I lived here 50 years, she said. I think I can manage one more visit. We moved slow. I came around to her side, eased the door open, and helped her swing her legs out. Her shoes found the pavement with a soft scuff. The walker unfolded with a familiar snap. The metal felt cool under my fingers. We took the path together, one careful shuffle at a time. The rose bush by the porch was in full bloom, bright against the weathered boards, as if nobody had told it anything had changed. Ruth paused at the bottom step. Her hand lifted, fingers grazing the railing she'd painted herself in the late 80s. The paint was chipped now, the wood worn smooth where countless hands had slid along it. At the top she stopped again. She reached out and rested her palm flat against the door frame. Hello, old friend, she whispered. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The house smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. The light fell in the same way it always had. angled through the front window, catching dust motes in lazy spirals. The yellow chair was still there by the window. Someone had draped a sheet over it while things were in limbo. I pulled it off and folded it away. The fabric beneath was the same, threadbare on one arm, slightly faded on the seat. Ruth lowered herself into it like she was slipping into a memory. I went to the kitchen, set the thermos of tea on the counter, and pulled out 2 cups. The cabinets creaked in the same spots. The floor still had that one board near the sink that squeaked no matter how you stepped on it. By the time I brought the tea back, Ruth was looking around slowly, eyes cataloging everything. "They didn't get a chance to paint," she said. "Or rip out that poor old carpet. State froze their fun," I said. She chuckled, a small sound but real. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat across from her. For a moment neither of us spoke. The house did all the talking it needed. Pipes humming, the distant hum of a lawn mower on the next street over, a neighbor's screen door slamming. "I knew what Marcella was capable of," Ruth said finally. Her eyes were on the table, tracing the grain. "I didn't want to believe she'd do it to me, but I knew." She said it as if she were reading a weather report. Not bitter. Not resigned. Just honest. "Why didn't you tell me about Mr. Lemon sooner?" I asked. "About the codicil. The letter." She took a sip of tea, then set the cup down carefully. "I thought I had time," she said. "I thought I'd picked the right moment. A quiet afternoon. Maybe after you'd had a good day instead of a hard one. I kept waiting for the perfect window where you wouldn't be tired, she wouldn't be around, and my nerves wouldn't be frayed." She shook her head, a rueful smile ghosting across her face. "Turns out there's never a right moment for the people we're afraid to disappoint," she said. "So I did what I could on my own, and I hid it where I thought you'd eventually look." "The hymnal," I said. She nodded. "You were always the one who put the books back in the right place," she said. "I figured if anyone was going to find a tucked-away page, it would be you." I traced the rim of my cup. "In that meeting at Trent's," I said, "when they had those statements laid out like a crime scene, I wanted to scream. I could see it again. The yellow highlights, the way Trent said concerning like he discovered a leak in a pipe instead of in a person. I wanted to slam my hands on the table," I said. "List every receipt, every night I stayed up with you, every time they didn't answer their phones. I wanted to tear the folder in half and throw the pieces at their feet." "What stopped you?" she asked. "Your face," I said. "In the kitchen. When I asked if you signed everything and you said, 'Not everything.'" I took a breath. I realized if I exploded there, I'd be playing the part they'd already written for me, I said. The emotional one. The irrational one. The problem. Walking out felt like giving up, but it wasn't. It was stepping out of the scene so I could write a different one somewhere else. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes silence is the only way not to feed a fire," she said. "Especially when the people holding the matches enjoy the show." I laughed once softly. "If you've ever stayed quiet because you knew the truth would surface on its own, that's not weakness," the narrator in me said, turning a thought outward. "That's strategy. Hit like if you've learned the hard way that not every fight needs words." I looked back at Ruth. "Do you regret anything?" I asked. She stared out the window for a moment, watching a car pass slowly down the street. "I regret not telling you about Mr. Lemon myself," she said. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I thought I had more time to ease you into it. I see now that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them know where the exit is before the fire starts." She turned back to me. "I don't regret choosing you," she said. A few weeks after the order, the fallout from Marcella and Trent settled into a new, less glamorous normal. The sale proceeds never made it into their hands. The buyer's lawsuit or threat of one meant any funds were chewed up by lawyers and adjustments. Marcella's carefully curated social circle thinned. People who'd once flocked to her dinner parties suddenly had conflicts, prior engagements, reasons to keep their distance from someone whose name had floated through a state investigation summary. She called a few times at first. Voicemails full of accusations. "You turned your back on us. You've ruined your brother's career. Families don't take each other to court." Eventually, even those slowed. Trent's world shrank in different ways. His license was suspended pending the outcome of the commission's review. The project he'd poured his pride into, the one that had needed a quick infusion of cash, collapsed. Investors pulled out. The building he'd once shown off in glossy renderings became someone else's problem. He moved out of the glass tower apartment. The next address he texted me months later was a modest walk-up on the edge of town. I didn't take joy in any of that. There were no slow-motion montages of their lives unraveling. No triumphant music. But I did feel something else. A quiet, justified distance. I stopped thinking of them as people I had to impress. I realized one evening, washing dishes alone in my own kitchen, that was the real freedom. This channel isn't for people who got handed everything. It's for the silliest, the ones who fold laundry, take night shifts, show up over and over, and still get called the problem when they finally draw a line. If that sounds like you, save this story and come back to it the next time someone tells you you're overreacting for noticing what they did. A few days after our day at the house, I brought the original letter and codicil to Harmony Gardens. Ruth's room looked a little different now. A new blanket on the bed, a photograph of the rose bush printed and framed on the wall. The potted plant on the windowsill had grown fuller. She was sitting in her chair when I walked in, cardigan button wrong by one button, eyes bright. "I brought something," I said. I set the letter and codicil on the small table between us. She leaned forward, adjusting her glasses, hands reaching for the pages like they were old friends. She placed her palm flat over the letter first. "I wrote this for the day they tell you that you were nothing," she said quietly. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I knew they'd try," she continued. "Not because you're nothing, but because it's easier to carry their guilt if they can convince themselves you're the one who failed. I wanted you to have something in my own hand that said, 'I see you. I chose you,' long before they decided you were convenient to blame." She tapped the paper lightly. "You're the one who stayed," she said. That's all I ever needed to know. Something shifted inside me then. I had spent most of my life hearing variations of the same script. You're good at caring. You're not ambitious. You're emotional. You're the helper. The afterthought. Sitting there with Ruth's handwriting a few inches from my fingers and her words hanging in the air, those labels felt thin, like cheap stickers that peel off when they finally meet heat and time. I wasn't the helper by default. I was the person she trusted most because I'd proven over and over that when things got hard I didn't run. My parents' favorite sold Grandma's house and called me a thief, the narrator in me said, shaping the story one last time. But Grandma's hidden letter said, in her own hand, who she believed. They walked away with the story they told themselves. I walked away with the truth, and the key to the only home that ever treated me like I belonged. If you watched this far, you didn't do it for entertainment. You did it because some part of this already knew your name. Maybe you've sat at a table where your story was rewritten without you. Maybe you've been the quiet one in the corner, watching people you love rearrange facts to suit their comfort. Maybe you've been told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, when all you did was point to the thing everyone else pretended not to see. Whatever you're carrying right now, you're further along than you think. Keep going. And if you're ready, the next story is already waiting for you.